All tanks were ready by 5:30 a.m. Only the rest of the Abteilung wasn't, and a bridge was still under construction. After sunrise we advanced, 7 Abteilung with Feldwebel Ulrich in the lead. The sun had just come up on the horizon, and thus we could hardly see anything. From the south we bypassed the village of Romaniki, and then squeezed past the village and began to cross the small stream from which yesterday the Russian tanks had attacked. While we were doing so, we were taken under a raging defensive fire. I used my machine gun to return fire. A terrible situation, standing on open ground, not being able to see properly against the glow of the rising sun, and the 2 tanks next to one's own have already been destroyed. In addition, the steering of my own Škoda Supersport wasn't working properly. I was lucky that I got through this. Frohlich's vehicle suffered engine breakdown somewhere. Hiller sat in H-31 of Unteroffizier Hagemann. The lead of the 7th Company then clashed with Russian tanks. Feldwebel Ulrich stood only 2 meters away from a Christie, which fired a round directly into the machine gun of the Škoda's loader. The shell went right through his body. Another Christie rolled up from the right, was hit by one of our tanks and erupted into flames. Then Ulrich used his gun to finish off the Russian at this unprecedented firing distance. 300 meters away I spotted another Russian which was firing on us. But how was I to hit it, with my miserable Czech optics and aiming against the sun? We don't even have tracer ammunition in our buckets, and when firing without optics, couldn't even observe the fall of our shot. I gave up firing on this target. What happened next was utter chaos. No orders from the Abteilung and only requests from the company. Oswald was issuing orders to his platoon, but then forgot to switch off the transmitter. One after the other, our tanks started going up in flames. In front of me, Feldwebel Ulrich and his crew were running around between the tanks. His wild hair had fallen into his face, and his blue neckerchief was hanging down his jacket. Huck, his driver, was with him. I won't forget the expressions on their faces any time soon. Oberleutnant Hiller and his tank were right behind me. Again and again tank shells slammed into the dirt around us. As there were no orders coming from the Abteilung, Hiller inquired what we were supposed to do. Hauptmann Stern bluntly replied, "The 5th is to break through," and Hiller passed the order on to the company. Oberfeldwebel Oswald realized the foolishness of the order and just ignored it, while I was still combing the edge of the forest with machine gun fire. I told Roland, the driver, to fire up the engine. The men inside a vehicle often don't realize that they are in a dangerous situation, which is good. But I decided to inform them that this was an all-or-nothing moment, and that we would need a lot of luck to avoid being shot up. The many burning tanks all around me didn't do much to raise my confidence. The engine didn't pull properly, and the steering on the left didn't work properly. I drove towards Leonhardt's Panzer IV, which was standing behind a bush, and then straight ahead across the boggy ground. The old bucket churned itself through the mud at a snail's speed. 500 meters away, in the shade of the forest's edge, I identified a Russian tank which fired its gun into the mass of assembled vehicles on our side. I fired one useless shot at it, but with less than 1% chance of a hit, one has to ignore even such a fat target and conserve ammunition. The other vehicles, however, instead of following up as ordered, were now slowly withdrawing. I stood completely alone in front, near a narrow road, while some hidden Russians fired a hail of machine gun bullets against my turret. Using my own machine gun, I managed to silence them for a moment. They had holed all the full fuel cans, tent squares, and rolled-up coats and blankets we carried on the rear, but it seemed that the Russians had withdrawn, or at least pulled their heads down into their foxholes. At that moment I watched my surroundings like a hawk as, in my exposed position, I didn't want to make the acquaintance of their hand grenades and Molotov cocktails. Wilhelm Lope had now realized that I was in a tight spot, and he and his loader fired their machine guns into the bushes next to me. When I looked to the rear, I could see at least 3 burning tanks. In the bushes next to me, another one was burning, and the black smoke it emitted drifted across the street. Not a nice feeling one has in such a situation. But then Hiller called me and ordered us to withdraw from the unseen enemy. But how am I to do that, with the shitty bucket in which I and my 3 men are sitting, when that route is so terrible that the other tanks didn't even manage to cross in forward gear? I was livid. But it's of no use. An order is an order. Now it's up to the driver, and to me in particular, to get the bucket back as well as possible. Between us and the bush where Leonhardt is standing, there is a large open plain across which fire from both sides is raging. The 4.7 cm of the Russians perforates our buckets as if they were made of paper. I let Roland climb up into the turret so that he can take a look at the route which will lead us over the treacherous terrain. There is a big waterhole there which we must stay away from. If we ended up in it, there is no way anyone could pull us out again. So we started reversing until we reached the bush where Leonhardt had his Panzer IV. We had done it. I can't describe how delighted I was. All the things that came next are hard to describe with words. As soon as the Panzer IV had given way, we could make another jump towards the rear. While we were doing so, some unseen enemy fired a few shots at us from the left flank. This was getting serious, and the old Škoda can't pull itself through the dirt. It makes one want to cry, standing on a tray, ready to be hit by the shell which destiny has reserved for us. One tank standing next to us is hit by whatever is firing there. At that moment, Breed calls on us to take some of the wounded with us to the rear. The doctor is running around. He has been wounded in the arm. A shell splinter. I climb out of the tank. Unteroffizier Moller is lying on the ground. One of his legs is missing, the other is badly shot up. The doctor has already applied rubber tourniquets. It's a familiar image. Moller's face has already turned yellow. He won't survive the transport. Oofs! Walter Bethke is also lying there. He was more lucky. Only one of his legs is full of splinters. Only. Assisted by Zimmermann, Dreyer's driver, I placed Moller on the engine deck of our tank. Bethke can still move and climbs up by himself. The staff surgeon, however, has already jumped back into his Panzer II and is trying to get away. That makes me incredibly angry. Where the hell are you going? He points hectically towards the rear, and off he goes. He has just disappeared when Oberfeldwebel Busse, Jupp Wellinghoff, who was a classmate of mine at the Karoli Gymnasium, and a small Gefreiter named Thieschewis jump out of their Panzer IV and into a rainwater ditch on the side of the field. At the same moment, I hear how their Panzer IV takes several direct hits before it bursts into flames. The Russians then switch fire on us. Probably a 7.62 centimeters gun which is now firing shot upon shot into the field. Jupp has 2 badly burned hands and a scorched face. I can see the raw flesh through the strips of skin hanging off his hands. His left foot has been torn open by a grazing shot. The whole boot is torn to shreds. The little Gefreiter is also wounded. My tank, the last working one, is moving. I order Brun to fetch an armoured half-track to evacuate the wounded. Brun leaves us with his machine pistol and jogs off, following our tank. I later learned that after catching up with the tank, my chaps headed back to Bolshansk. On the way, they were hit by a Russian anti-tank gun, which failed to cause any lasting damage and only hold a few petrol cans on the back of the vehicle. It didn't hurt Bethke any further either. Once he arrived, Brun made sure that Bethke was transported to hospital and then approached Hauptmann Stern, asking him to send a few tanks back to assist us. This was denied, so Brun decided to turn back to help us himself. As he was doing so, he was spotted by Hauptmann Bergstaller and immediately sent back into the village. Bad luck. On the field, which is now full of our burning tanks, I give first aid to the little Gefreiter, pulling a few scraps of fabric from the wound in his hip before applying a dressing. Nobody carries any more dressings, so I have to use a piece of string to apply a tourniquet to the wound of Jupp Wellinghoff, who is bleeding heavily. Oberfeldwebel Busse is also moaning, something wrong with his foot. He is moaning quite loudly, and I take a closer look. Nothing is visible other than a small flesh wound. I give him a bollocking for making such a show for crap like that. To distract him, I press the machine pistol into his hand and tell him to make sure that we are not surprised by Russian infantry. At that moment, the Panzer IV explodes and we are showered with a rain of metal lumps. And because the 7.62 is still firing, I then decide that we 3 need to get away on foot. Jupp is pulling himself together and with his badly mangled foot is able to walk. I am astounded that little Thieschewis is still so mobile, even though the wound in his hip is rather deep. I have forgotten to mention that before that, Obergefreiter Thiemeyer from Herford, also a member of Bunz's Panzer IV crew, and the Obergefreiter Grothuis of 7th Company had come past us, and in the wild chaos I sent the 2, together with Zimmermann, towards the rear. I took Jupp Wellinghoff under my arm and together we hobbled towards Bolshansk. We hadn't come very far when suddenly we were taken under machine gun fire from the left, and from the forest on our right. We threw ourselves onto the ground and continued to crawl forward. I had to marvel at Jupp's conduct, and how he managed to do all that with his badly burned hands, which by that time were shedding bloody water, not even mentioning the bad wound on his foot. Bunze and the little Gefreiter also managed to keep up with us. We continued to crawl forward further and further, and as soon as anyone raised his head, the bullets whistled across our heads. That way we managed to get to a position about 400 meters in front of Bolshansk, which was still burning and smoking. Then, 300 meters in front of us on the left, I spotted several people. They were wearing steel helmets. But our men didn't wear such big greatcoats. I used Bunce's binoculars, and damn, they are Russians. A terrible tightening feeling in my chest and my lower abdomen when I suddenly realized that we had been cut off from our regiment. Surrounded! What a mess! So what shall we do? I think about it. The situation is as bad as it gets. We four decide to stay low where we are. We will wait for a while. I am scanning the surroundings with the binoculars. The Russians are spread out in a line across the route we have to take toward the right. The Russian artillery is firing into the area even further to the right. That means that this is still our territory. On the road to the rear, next to where we were recently standing, several columns of Russian infantry are marching now. Russian tanks are rolling towards the forest in front of Cholm. A few others, turrets turned towards the rear, roll towards Romaniki. Now we can also see the Russian tank which had fired on us earlier on. A shitty situation. We are cut off on both sides. The only hope now is that the Russian positions, which we had taken under fire yesterday with my platoon and Lopez's Panzer IV, are still unoccupied. But first I crawl back with the intention to reach a burned-out Škoda tank standing on the road on the right. Maybe the wounded can hide below it. Or should we surrender? I am an officer, and as such the chances that I would survive a surrender are meagre. The others, though, might get out unhurt. I know Jupp Wellinghoff's wife in Osnabrück. That is what I am thinking about at this moment. No, I won't surrender to the Russians as long as I still have bullets in my pistol. While I am crawling towards the Škoda, I see Gruthuis of 7th Company running back. He is standing behind the burned-out tank, and then Zimmermann follows. Both have still got their pistols, so they can still defend themselves. The face of Gruthuis is black and scorched. I approach them and then send them back. Jupp is behind me and asks what he is supposed to do now. I tell him to pull himself together once more and to join the others, who are now withdrawing along a row of bushes. On the field ahead, I have spotted a group of Russian infantry who are examining the bodies of some fallen German soldiers. It is time now! I shout over to Bunce and tell him to give me fire support. Zimmermann, Gruthuis, Jupp and Tieshuis have reached a shallow ditch 200 meters behind us and are now preparing to reach the forest in front of Cholm. Are they mad? I told them to head towards the area on the right, which is being shelled by the Russian artillery. And yes, that has drawn the attention of a group of Russians who immediately take us under fire, and now the situation is getting hairy for me. The Russians ahead take cover behind the burned-out tank and open fire on me and Bunce, who is returning fire with his machine pistol. I crawl back towards the bushes and then cover Bunce when he jumps back to join me. Bunce has emptied the first magazine. Someone is firing on us from the left too. We have to get back as quickly as possible. Bunce's machine pistol jams. The magazine is stuck. Russians are only 50 meters away now. The brothers are throwing hand grenades. I can see clearly the green fragmentation rings of their stick grenades as they wheel through the air. 5 meters too short? Thank God. Bunce has jumped further back. I have to follow. On my stomach I crawl through the shallow ditch, bushes 50 meters away. That is where I need to go. By now I don't give a shit anymore. I have just run 10 meters when the Russians start firing like mad. I'm standing on a serving tray. I throw myself into the grass and pull my exhausted body forward. I can't breathe anymore. Then suddenly a hard blow to my head. That came from behind. I take off my cap and touch my skull, which is suddenly hurting mightily. No blood. Nothing has happened. But the cap has a hole in it where the bullet has passed through. My eyes start to flicker in a red light. But then I can go on. Once I reach the bushes, I rush as fast as I can to another ditch on the field. The Russians on the right are getting frighteningly close. Closer to the ditch ahead, I see a few men clad in black. Thank God they are already that far ahead. But I have to think about myself now. I just start running as fast as I can across the rye field. The soil is clinging to my boots, weighing my feet down. But that doesn't matter. What follows now is the worst and most terrible 1,000-meter sprint of my life. Behind me, the Russians, who are now screaming and shouting. When they shoot at me, they have to stand still for a moment. Something is firing at me from the left, but soon I am putting a distance between me and the Russians. 300 meters now. With long strides, I race across the field. When I can't breathe anymore, I throw myself onto the ground for the briefest of moments. Then I continue. The pistol in my right, the binoculars in my left hand. At that moment, I am past caring. Around me, bullets are smacking into the ground and others whiz and swish past my head. Never mind. I have to go on. I reach a hollow in which I throw myself down again, just deep enough to get out of my coat. I take the spare magazines out of the pockets. I cram the maps into my trouser pockets and then do the same with my calendar, notebook and diary. In my grey turtleneck pullover, I then start running again. I am tempted when I see a few horses running around in the field, but I have no clue how to handle them, and it's better to rely on my own legs. I walk the next 100 to 200 meters. I have to save my stamina. The Russians haven't kept up with me, but when I walk through a sunflower field, the volume of fire from the left is increasing again. Shit on them. They can't hit anything anyway, and I have to conserve my strength. In front, I see the position which I have taken under fire only a day before. I stare into the trees and cannot see a single Russian. The positions have been abandoned. I jump over a trench and approach a small stream running along the valley floor. A few big steps and I am across the water. Another 100 meters, I climb over a fence and disappear among the trees. The Russians send a few machine gun volleys in my direction, but now I am safe. Deeper into the undergrowth, just to avoid the possibility of running into a Russian reconnaissance squad. Once inside the undergrowth, I feel safe and protected. Experiences gathered while playing cowboys and Indians in the forests of my hometown, and later, from the time in the Boy Scouts, now comes in handy. I am quite proud that I am not making a sound while I am sneaking from bush to bush. I have to think about home and whether my father ever experienced shit like this. After the war, I will marry. If I had at least had a boy at home, even if only a toddler, I would be a lot calmer. I also have to think about sports during my army time in Freistadt. As a young lieutenant, I always wondered about the complete lack of sporting exercise among the officers. Not a single one of the officers in the Abteilung would have been able to match my pace today. Soon I reach a small valley. A small stream runs through it, and nearby there is a pasture. How peaceful it is. On the other side, the colourful leaves of birch and nut trees and the occasional pine. It's like a nice autumn stroll, and suddenly my eyes fill with tears. I don't know why. I think about the huge amount of luck I have enjoyed in the previous days, and I can't help putting my hands together and take a grateful look above the treetops into the bright blue sky. I am praying. Not like Christian would. I am not thinking about Christ for having saved my life. I think Wilhelm Lope once said to me that everyone who is standing on our side out here has to be at peace with himself, must consider his life finished, and must never rely on help from any side. Man is not big enough to hope for the assistance and help of a higher being. The experiences here show us daily how small and meaningless our lives are, and how grateful we have to be that we exist at all. This knowledge must drive us to great accomplishment, as only that way can we make ourselves worthy of that existence. I have now learned of how little importance the threat of death is in serious moments like this. How little I cared about death. I didn't care anymore. I took off my cap and looked at the long tear the bullet had left in it. A few millimeters further down and my name would have been added to those of the other 17 officers killed during the campaign in Russia, to that of the Prince of Ratibor in the campaign in Poland, and to that of Schlegel in France. How small we humans are and how little is lost when we die. At that moment I touch my Lucky Charm medallion, my talisman. When I look at it now, it gives me a feeling of strength and warmth. Everything around and inside me has been shaken up. I can't wait to get back home. When I step out of the forest, I check whether I can spot any tanks in the village of Pastoshka. If they have gone, then I have to find Kampfgruppe Raus behind the forest. From the forest edge I can see the rooftops of Pastoshka, and also the Russians at Bolshansk. I have to move on. I withdraw into the undergrowth. It is too dangerous alongside the forest edge. Then suddenly there is a lorry, a license-built Ford, standing in front of me. It's right inside the forest. The engine is running. I approach it cautiously. The crew must be around somewhere, but there is not a single soul to be seen. Maybe there are weapons inside it. There is a parachute and a leather flying cap on the load bed. They are German. No chance for the pilot if he has fallen into the hands of the Reds. There is a box with sausages too, and another with cutlery. I take 5 small sausages in case I require rations for a longer walk. I also take the flying cap as a souvenir. The white silk of the parachute is tempting me too. Would make a nice wedding dress and would give me something to wave about when I run into German troops. Our riflemen shoot on anything that moves. Rubbish! I leave the silk and climb up a tree to have a look at the surroundings. Tanks roll up the road towards Cholm, and Russian infantry is there too. I walk for another 30 minutes and step out of the forest again. Now I have a view on Pastoshka, and yes indeed, there are tanks there and men are walking and standing between the trees. They are ours. Hurrah! I have made it! I run into the field waving like mad to avoid being shot down by some idiot. But damn, what is that? There is a Russian lying in the field. Have they surrounded the village? But then I see tank tracks and realize that these are the corpses of the Russians who were mown down hometown. Our riflemen shoot on anything that moves. Rubbish! I leave the silk and climb up a tree to have a look at the surroundings. Tanks roll up the road towards Cholm, and Russian infantry is there too. I walk for another 30 minutes and step out of the forest again. Now I have a view on Pastoshka, and yes indeed, there are tanks there and men are walking and standing between the trees. They are ours. Hurrah! I have made it! I run into the field waving like mad to avoid being shot down by some idiot. But damn, what is that? There is a Russian lying in the field. Have they surrounded the village? But then I see tank tracks and realize that these are the corpses of the Russians who were mown down by Wasmuth yesterday evening. Now our men are approaching me. No one can believe it. Everyone is patting my back and congratulating me. So many hands to shake. All the officers come to see me, Lope and Theo Langenbruch among them. They had already given me up. Willem Lope's nerves are clearly wrecked. He is close to tears. I try to make a joke to cheer him up and make him laugh. In the end, I fail to hide the bitter seriousness in my voice when I ask him if he really believed that I would leave him alone among this assembly of cyclists and no-hopers. Anyway, all has turned out well. Roland and Brune, the loyal souls, and Müller with the old comrades of the signals platoon. They all come to say some kind words. Feldwebel Ulrich is there with his driver. I have to tell the whole story to Major Lohr, and I don't spare him the accusation that no tanks had been sent back to us. I can't hide my feeling about this whole fuck-up of an attack. He can read all that in my face. He is trying to make sense of it all by telling the little lieutenant and all his other subordinates who are now his judges that we have tied down the 101st Red Armoured Division here at Bolshansk and thus kept the path towards the Dnieper bridgeheads open for our troops. In the end, a little man like me can't give a Knight's Cross holder like him a fitting reply other than to congratulate him on his prestigious success. As such, Willem Lope and I headed to a well and washed ourselves. Then a bit of food. And after we had watched how the Russians used their Christie tanks to pull their broken tanks and our wrecked Škodas from the field, including the command tanks of 5th and 7th Company with their valuable radio documents, I went to visit the wounded.